Just wanted to start off by saying, as we know, AI is constantly an evolving landscape. I think everybody woke up this morning to even more headlines about tech, about sales of tech, about concerns about AI. So our speakers actually presented on this topic nearly a year ago in Cardiff live, and the pace of change has only accelerated since then. So that's why we thought we would take this opportunity to bring everybody back together and have a look to see what those changes are, the new tools, the new ethical considerations, and how we're reshaping the way communicators work and the skills that we need to stay effective. So today we're going to hear from both industry and academia and consultancy. We're going to get two perspectives that together will give us a fuller picture on where AI is taking us as a profession. So I'm going to kick off now formally and introduce our speakers. So first we have Shayoni Lynn. Welcome, Shayoni. She's CEO and founder of the Lynn Group and a leading voice in strategic comms. Shayoni will be focusing on the more urgent aspects of AI in comms, myths and disinformation, and how PR professionals are responding to challenges like synthetic media, deepfakes, information manipulation. In addition, I'd like to welcome Dr. John White. John is a respected PR scholar and a consultant, and he's going to build on his presentation from last year and also his participation in BLEDCom earlier this year. So he's going to take a different lens and a step back and explore the bigger picture. So welcome everybody. As I said, Q&As, if we could keep those, submit those via the chat or the Q&A function. And I'd like to open the floor up to John.
Kerry, thanks very much, and thanks PRCA for providing another opportunity for Shayoni and I to talk about developments in AI. As you mentioned, Kerry, we had the session last year in Cardiff, face-to-face session, where Shayoni and I talked about the current state of adoption of AI in public relations and the implications for practice. So this session is very much a follow-on from that. We've had another year of developments. As you said, Kerry, I mean, developments take place on a daily basis when we're talking about the topic of AI, and I'll touch on some of those as I talk. I don't intend to talk for too long. My notes for what I'm talking about are available. Kerry will make them available afterwards. There are references in those notes to a lot of the things that I'll be mentioning, and they provide a summary of what I'm going to be touching on. So a lot of developments in the past year. In relation to public relations, we've seen reports come out. We've seen professional groups like the CIPR, like the Global Alliance for Public Relations and Communications Management, look at the developments in AI and how they affect public relations. I'd recommend, and this is referenced, a report from March this year from the Global Alliance, Reimagining the Future, AI and Public Relations. There's the European Communication Monitor. New edition of that will be out in mid-November, and I'm sure that will also be touching heavily on developments in AI. In terms of books, we're now seeing quite important books being prepared on AI and public relations. Recent book edited by Yang Cheng and Dejan Vercic, AI and Strategic Communication. And another book that is coming out next year, which is going to be authored by Stephen Waddington and Ben Verinder, edited rather than authored. And that will bring together most of the people most knowledgeable of AI in the UK. Stephen Waddington, Ben Verinder, and Andrew Bruce Smith are all experts on this topic to follow. And again, I've included references to the work of those individuals on this topic in the notes. So to keep current, I would suggest to you, if you're not following those people, add them to your list of people to follow on this. The other development in the past year to mention is the International Public Relations Research Symposium. which takes place each year in Bled, Slovenia, and brings together academics and practitioners from around the world. This last conference in June this year looked at the topic of AI. It asked whether AI is a boon or a curse to practice. And I'll come back to that in a few moments because there's quite a lot that came out of that conference that's worth mentioning. Last year in Cardiff, I talked about the diffusion of innovations. And this is a well-worn research field, looking at how innovations, once they emerge, are adopted and used in practice. And there is a common pattern to the way innovations are taken up and eventually become widely used. So if you think back to the emergence of the internet, you think back to the profusion of social media and the way they were picked up, and they have now been incorporated into practice. And you can think about the length of time it took for those innovations to be adopted into practice. We can look at the same pattern, and again, I've included the model for this in the notes, but we know there's a clear pattern to the adoption of innovations. We can expect that in 5 years' time or so, we will be routinely using AI extensively. We will be reaping its benefits in practice. We'll have much more knowledge of its pitfalls, and it will be much less of a hot topic, if you like. There is associated with the pattern of adoption, there is also a discussion about innovation which takes place, characterized in its early stages by what could be described as quite a lot of hype. You know, this innovation is going to change the world. And it's true that AI is transformative, but it's also been talked up extensively. And we've now reached the point in the adoption curve where we're starting to be more realistic about what AI can really be used for in public relations practice. The Global Alliance report that I mentioned a few minutes ago shows, and this is the experience in practice, practitioners are experimenting with AI, adopting some uses which they find most practical. But at the moment, we don't have widespread use of AI to the extent hoped for yet. It will happen, but we don't have that sort of usage established yet. And at the same time, we're becoming aware of some of the pitfalls of AI. There's one I'd just like to mention very quickly. The management consultancy accounting firm Deloitte got into trouble earlier this month with the Australian government, where it produced a report for the government at great expense, where they had made use of AI to produce the recommendations. But it was discovered when those recommendations were examined that they were full of hallucinations, and the recommendations were actually quite questionable for that reason. Deloitte was forced to reimburse the Australian government to the extent of thousands of Australian dollars. And this is an issue in public relations practice, that the value of our work will be questioned in the near future, because some of that work now depends on the use of time to complete projects, where the time is shortened through the use of AI. How can you then justify a fee based on time if you're taking much less time to do the work? And this is just one of the pitfalls that's emerging. At BLEDCOM, what we did was conduct a face-to-face scenario planning exercise, looking at the likely future use of AI in practice. And we looked 5 years into the future. The best case scenario sees AI widely used by knowledgeable practitioners, where full benefits are being realized from its knowledgeable use. The most likely scenarios that use will still, probably in 5 years' time, remain patchy. It's a question of whether or not practitioners will develop sufficient knowledge to be able to use it to its fullest extent. And the worst case scenario is that we'll be left behind. Others will be more knowledgeable in the use of the technology, and they will be giving the advice on how the technology should be used, and the sort of policies that need to be put into place for its use. So we're on the cusp of huge opportunity, but we may fail to take advantage of that opportunity. The biggest obstacle from the scenario planning exercise discovered against us taking full advantage of the opportunities is the willingness of practitioners to learn quickly, to stay abreast of the developments, to use those applications which they find most useful, most relevant to the questions of practice, to address questions like how, for example, fees will be set in a changed commercial environment where AI reduces the time to carry out routine tasks. The other huge opportunity, which we recognize on the horizon, is that we will be able to make use of the time freed up for practitioners to make a much greater contribution at the strategic and higher levels of management. So they can be much more involved in doing more creative work and giving advice at higher levels. Those are the opportunities that we face. Technology develops apace. I mean, just even in the last month or so, several new applications have come out relating to the production of video content on the basis of prompts. Even more opportunity for the development of very powerful material, but again, the pitfalls are there, and we can talk about those in the discussion. So with that, I'd like to open up for Shayoni to add her practical experience to what I've just been saying, and I hope that you will find answers to the questions you may have as we get into the question and answer session. So I'll hand over to Shayoni now, if I may.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here today. Pleasure to continue the discussion that we kicked off last year. And thank you to PRCA Cymru for having us back on this really important topic. So very similar to what John has described, I think when we had this discussion in Cardiff last year, the room was full of excitement and also uncertainty. There was hype, there was confusion, and also a mix of fear and fascination that comes with any new technology. And that is very reflective, I think, where the industry was last year. And I think if you look at 1 year on, it's fair to say that that tone has shifted. I do believe that we are moving from experimentation to integration, whether that is willingly or unwillingly, because our organizations are investing in AI technologies that we have to scale up very quickly to be able to integrate into. But we are moving from that experimentation phase to an integration phase. And most communicators that I'm speaking to aren't asking whether to use AI anymore. They're asking how to use it responsibly. And to John's point, there is quite clearly a very deep capability gap in terms of the skills and knowledge required to efficiently use AI. And I think it's fair to say that we're no longer preparing for AI, we're living with AI. John has shared some really great resources. I would add to those resources from a practitioner perspective. Stuart Bruce does a lot of commentary on AI. So if you're not following Stuart, alongside Stephen, Andrew, and Ben, worth following. And of course, if you're looking for a more holistic view on AI, Ethan Mollick, the professor at Wharton, is someone who is extremely influential in the space and is quite trend-setting in the way he's thinking about AI application within organizations and within team dynamics. So it's useful to follow them. I want to quickly touch on the dual reality of AI. So on one side, it is an extraordinary accelerator of creativity and insight, to John's point. It helps us not just create content, it helps us test messages faster, analyze sentiment more deeply, and reach our audiences in ways that once took weeks or even months, right? But on the other hand, it has also become the most powerful amplifier of falsehoods in human history. AI today can write, clone, imitate, and fabricate, and it does so with remarkable fluency. And as this technology advances, which it's doing at great speed, this fluency will only grow. And very soon, in the not too distant future, these falsehoods then might sound far more credible, far more persuasive, and potentially be far more pervasive than the communications that we put out. So that raises difficult questions. What does it mean for practice when the concept of truth is under attack? What happens when truth becomes negotiable, which we're seeing play out in front of our eyes? And how do we do our jobs when our audiences push back against fact and they choose fiction? And so I think that tension between innovation and integrity is fast becoming the defining challenge for our profession. I'll also briefly talk about how AI is changing the psychology of misinformation. If you've heard me speak before, you know this is an area I specialize in, but I want to set the scene, so make sure we're all on the same page. What is misinformation? Disinformation, rather, is the proliferation of false information with intent, and misinformation is the proliferation of false information without intent. So in other words, all disinformation is misinformation, but not all misinformation is disinformation. And there's a whole other conversation about intent and motivation. We're not going to get into that. But it's worth remembering that false and misleading information is not just spreading and it's not just sticking because people are gullible, right? It's spreading and it's sticking because it feels plausible. So what AI is doing is supercharging this by making misinformation travel faster and in a way that feels far more personal. For something that is synthetic, it does a damn good job of connecting with people's emotions, their values, and their identities. So suppose the question is, where does that leave us as communicators? AI can do many things we once thought required human skill. It still cannot do what matters most. It can't weigh judgment, it can't understand beliefs, it can't build trust. It can pretend to do it, it can try and replicate, but it doesn't have that innate ability that makes us human. And those are still human advantages. So our job, I believe, and I believe John and others in the room might agree, isn't to compete with AI's efficiency. We should look to work in tandem with AI to protect truth, to protect and build integrity, and to protect our societal values. So a year from now, when we look back again, which we will, I hope we're not talking about AI as a risk to manage, but as a capability to govern, because used responsibly, AI can help us not just be more efficient and be more productive and be more creative, but can also help us counter falsehoods, rebuild trust, refocus our communications around truth, around empathy and understanding. And I think that that's not just the future of AI and PR, that I believe that is the future of PR itself. So thank you, and I think we'll take some questions now.
Thank you both, Shayoni and John, for that insight. I haven't seen any questions coming from the audience yet, but I do have some prepared already. We have an interesting mixture of audience, which includes also some of the students currently studying in various locations with our university partners for comms degrees, media, PR, etc. So it would be great to get your insight, John, on the skill set required for the future. Because the future is not just when you graduate, it's tomorrow as well. And also Shayoni, for the sort of any insight that you could share for those potentially either entering into the profession or newly arrived in the profession.
Thanks, Kerry. I mean, the question of skills needed in practice now, this is one of the issues raised by AI. There is a discussion going on about employment practices, whether or not, because routine tasks usually performed by entry-level practitioners can be handled so easily, it seems, by AI capability. Will there be a need to recruit so many people into entry-level positions? The problem with that is if people don't come into those entry-level positions to learn and consolidate their basic foundation skills, how will they be able to develop those skills so that they can assess the output of AI capability. So it will still be an absolute requirement coming into the practice to be prepared to consolidate basic skills in communication and in content preparation and in research, so that practitioners coming in will be confident that they have those skills to be able to assess whatever might be provided to them by AI. But going on beyond those basic skills, they will need to be much more ready to learn. And so at preparation for coming into practice, the idea of readiness to learn, learning how to absorb information, make sense of it, analyze it, much more so in the future. People are going to have to be prepared to learn quickly. It's also going to be important to look at, and Shayoni touched on this, but the point of creativity. What constitutes creativity in practice? How creative a practice is public relations really? When we have in the past, I'd suggest we have relied on certain formulaic approaches. We have to open up to the whole possibility of creativity, the use of imagination, which is a very human capability. So this is something to be emphasized going forward, imagination. And also people have to be prepared for this movement towards higher levels of practice. Coming in with a basic qualification, people will have to be prepared to build very definitely on that to work at higher levels. And that means learning more about management, more about what's involved in management decision-making, how decision-making can be improved, how planning can be improved. So really, the opportunities are huge, but people have to be willing to pick them up.
Thanks, John. And Shayoni, what would you say if you were advising a young practitioner starting today? What new skill or mindset would you tell them to prioritize?
I think John's covered a lot of really good ground, and I would say fluency is really important. I think the next generation has, the cards are stacked in their favor, right? Because it's coming to them at a time when they haven't kind of build their practice. They're not coming at this with baggage and bias and all of that. So it's very fertile ground. So that's very exciting. But fluency is important. And I think the people who are going to stand out, whether in next gen or even in our practice today, are people who can, bullshit is not going to cut it very, very quickly, right? So we need to build our own skills. So fluency is really important, authentic fluency, just having a few jargon words that we drop in, which by the way, as practice, we do a lot, right? And let's call a spade a spade. So we can't do that because the level of knowledge globally on this is increasing. And I think we need to keep pace with that level of knowledge, and we need to be authentic, and we need to be capable and demonstrate that capability. John talked about sort of the innovation, the imagination and creativity. And I think Ben and I were doing a podcast, which still hasn't come out. And we were talking about this briefly, which is that as a behavioral scientist, right? I'm always talking to people about how we process information and how we make decisions. And fundamentally, we have two parts of our brain. We have an automatic brain, or a system one, and a reflective brain. And the reality is the majority of our decision making is automatic, the minority is reflective. So we are not necessarily always making pros and cons list. And through the years, when I've been talking, or other behavioral scientists talk about this judgment and decision making field, we talk about the need to up our own reflective brain, so we're making more rational decisions, right, when it matters. I think what's really interesting when it comes to AI is that reflective brain is supercharged. It's a very rational brain. So what we bring into that conversation is that automatic system one, which is our empathy, our intuition, our gut instinct, our memories, our emotions, our identities. And that is what human in loop relationship is all about. So I think embracing that is really important. I use AI for everything. I use AI at work, I use AI personally. I've built a relationship with my agents in a way that it now understands me, and we self-correct each other. And that's a really, I think, that's still very much in its infancy in terms of how we're going to engage with AI, but that's going to grow, right, as technology advances. So I think embracing our irrationality, I think, is quite an attractive proposition and differentiator, but also having the fluency to match it. This ship has sailed. It's not going to stop, right? So it's up to us as practitioners and as practice to keep up.
Thanks, Shayoni. And while we're on board the ship, we have actually had somebody submit a question. I'm going to read it out. This is probably feels like an exact scenario that could land on your desk today as a practitioner, or that John could be issuing as potentially as an academic to maybe students. So I'll read this out. Not sure if this is relevant for the discussion. What advice would you provide for responding to a journalist who said the content shared with them is Gen AI produced, but actually wasn't? Or if you're not sure it was because it was provided by the client, or would you not reply at all? I see this as a bigger issue, not only just damaging relationships with the press, but what if your content has poor grammar, punctuation, or formatting and is mistaken for Gen AI content? Or if these issues are caused by a person being dyslexic or English not being their first language, where do we draw the line? So I've read that in its entirety. Would both of you like to maybe take a different lens on that as a response?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll go fast. It's a really, really reflective comment. So thank you very much for sharing that. I think there are a few things to tease out of it, right? So the first thing is so what? So what if it is, right? Content will be mass produced by AI. And that's a reality, I think, across the board we need to accept. And journalists certainly need to accept that. If the content is false or misleading or inaccurate, these are things to be concerned about. But in terms of it being created, I think we're putting a lot of focus on like the creation element of it. But obviously, if you're cut, copy, pasting, that's very different, right? And it will sound like AI. I mean, if you're pushing something out like that, then, that's up to you, because it will sound generated by a non-human. But I think there is an element about pushing back and say, so what? As long as you're confident that the content reflects what you want to get across, right? So I think it's a mature discussion to have with the journalist, and to say, okay, I get where you're coming from, but help me understand why that's a problem, because this is going to get more and more pervasive as if you're writing, if you're voice noting and transcribing, that's still technology, right? And no one's going to call us out on that. And the other thing, I read a really insightful post by Claire Williamson, who runs an agency called Resonance. And she said, actually, she's read some research, and I can't source check right now, but she said, apparently there's this whole shift about content now having inaccuracies, and that's what makes it human. So are we now going to be, deluded with content, with like delusional content, which is got errors and typos and purposefully embedded to try and not sound Gen AI? And that is a whole different conversation. I think there's a real discussion to be had about where does neurodiversity fit into this. And I think that's a really sharp point. I think as practice, we need to call it out and say that actually, we need to raise more visibility and awareness about the challenges faced by neurodivergent colleagues, and sort of reflect that back to the wider industry and civil society, that needs to be taken care of as well. And it's not just within practice, right? Neurodivergent people are everywhere. And so that, I think, does need more, dare I say it, awareness raising. But I think there's lots of things. I think fundamentally starts with a human conversation with that journalist to understand where the friction is, and then start that ball going. But if you're confident in your content, you should be able to hold your ground.
Thanks, Shayoni. That's great to hear from a practitioner point of view. John, did you have any insight to share on that?
Yes, I'd add to that from discussions. One of my roles is chief assessor with the Chartered Institute of Public Relations Chartership program. And in that program, we have regular assessment sessions where we bring together people who are coming up for chartership. So these are experienced practitioners. And recently, quite a lot of the discussion in those assessment sessions has been on how is AI affecting practice, and how can we adapt adapt practice to the new capabilities. One of the things that's come out very strongly in those discussions is a question relating, and again, Shayoni touched on this, the authenticity of content generated by AI. And what I was talking about earlier about basic skills, where practitioners will need to have the basic skills to be able to assess content that they're using for whatever purpose. One of the basic skills will be the assessment of content presented to journalists. So against this question, there would be a need to assess literally the sound of the material. If it comes from a client, or if it's been written by the practitioner themselves. What does it sound like? Does it sound like AI generated content? Because what comes out of the discussions with these practitioners presenting themselves for chartership is that they have found, and I'm sure the research certainly supports this, that content which is deemed to be AI generated is like the content that you see with the heading, "This is an advertising feature" in a consumer magazine. People will tend to discount that content because it's not, they feel, authentic. And so we have to be able to pick this up before we present content onwards. So if it has been AI generated, will it stand up, and will it form the basis of discussion on the merit of the content? Or does it need to be rewritten into a more human form before it's sent on? So AI raises questions of the quality of content generation. And I mean, a hopeful thing in relation to the questioner's concerns is that the journalist has come back and said, can we talk about the content? So, I mean, media relations is media relations. The important part of the work in media relations is actually having a relationship with, media, media personnel, whether they're social media or traditional media. So this is an example of where AI opens up possibilities, but also creates new difficulties.
Thanks very much, Don. That's interesting to get two sides, as if it just literally happened in a PR practitioners network, and also if you were a student, etc. So, and that was submitted anonymously. So hopefully that sort of addressed the question for the person who submitted that. We've actually got another submission here. Just bear with me, I'm going to read it out. I actually wrote my master's dissertation on misinformation and AI in digital politics and how it fuels populist debate. The intersection of all these areas is so exciting to me as a recent PR comms grad. AI, as you said, Shayoni, often rewards emotional engagement over factual accuracy. Given that, how can PR practitioners maintain public trust and ethical integrity when the very systems distributing our content are designed to favour and amplify what performs and reinforces existing beliefs, not what's true? Should we as practitioners be fighting harder against AI and algorithms to maintain the authenticity and ethics of our sector? Hope this makes sense. That's a biggie. I'm going to leave that one over to you too.
Love it. I love it. Such a great question. Thank you for whoever wrote this. If you want to chat about this later, find me. I love the question. It's a deep question. It's one that I reflect on. I know parts of our industry are reflecting on. It's a very urgent issue to resolve, and I love the fact that the attendee is talking about beliefs, because I think before we answer the question of do we push back, what do we do, I think it's really important for us as communicators to understand why people believe misinformation. I think that's often misunderstood. So misinformation is complex, and there are many cognitive, social, and emotional factors involved in the development, the sharing, and the persistence of false beliefs. So to be able to understand why our audiences are believing misinformation, outside of the fact that algorithms are engineered to reward engagement over accuracy, we need to understand belief systems. And belief systems are basically cognitive frameworks that guide our perceptions, our judgments, and our decision makings. And our belief systems, funnily enough, don't rely on facts alone. They include our values, they include our worldviews, and our social identities. And they also draw on our fears and emotions. And so when information is presented to us, whether it's true or false, And if that contradicts our belief systems, it can be psychologically difficult and even painful to accept this information. So it's far easier for us to reject it. And on the flip side, when information aligns with our belief systems, we are much more prone to readily accepting it. And so when we're looking at belief systems, the core part that I try and reinforce in every conversation is the importance of considering belief embeddedness, right? So beliefs are diverse and multifold, might be prevalent, but when beliefs become embedded, when they become part of our identities, they intensify reactance. So when false or misleading information connects with our belief systems on multiple nodes, say political identity, group norms, moral values, our belief in that false or misleading information becomes much stronger, essentially making us resistant to fact-checking, right? And so this is fundamentally where reactive strategies like fact-checking and debunking, which our industry has kind of prioritized and kind of sought as a magic bullet, it fails. And why the research community and those operating on the front lines of countering misinformation are constantly advocating for a more proactive, more preventative approach. And I think for communicators, it's not just, having that knowledge, but also what are we going to do about it? And we need to shift from a reactive approach to a proactive one. And one of the most successful approaches to sustainably countering misinformation, despite the systemic nature of this risk and the infrastructures that are supporting and enabling it, is the application of something called inoculation theory or pre-bunking, which people in the room might have heard of. And much of this work has been made very popular by Professor Sander van der Linden, who's a professor in Cambridge, and his team. They have gamified this particular theory, inoculation theory, in extremely novel, interesting ways. They've scaled this up from on a population level. And what this theory does is based on a concept of a vaccine. So if you expose your audiences to weakened doses of misinformation, they can build mental antibodies and therefore psychological resilience against manipulative techniques. Pre-bunking can be fact-based or it can be logic-based, but it's a proactive approach. So it's basically exposing our audiences in controlled manner to these manipulative techniques before they face exposure, right? And so I think it is really important for us as communicators not just to think, what do I do from within the structures I currently work within, but also like what is within my power and we can't change the algorithms. We are not going to change big tech. That, again, ship has sailed, right? We're in a space where big tech is quite protected, where, this is a very financially lucrative space of innovation. So we're not going to change the systems overnight. I mean, it's right that we push for it. But what can we do? And I think as communicators, we can adopt principles that are proactive versus reactive. We can push for a better understanding of our audience. We can push to better understand and invest in research to create the creatives and the content and the solutions in a way that's far more intuitive. It really connects with our audiences and it makes them more resilient over time. But this is not a, one-hit wonder. It's not going to happen overnight. And it's something that we as practice need to really sign up to and subscribe to, because 2 years running, the World Economic Forum has marked misinformation as a systemic risk, as the number one threat that faces us as a society. And that's, beyond extreme weather, all of this stuff. So we must take this as seriously as the rest of the world is taking it.
Thanks, Shayoni. John, do you like to add anything to that? And just to reiterate, it was how PR practitioners maintain public trust and ethical integrity. But also, just another expansion of the question for John on that, are there any other professions like law or medicine that are also grappling with these AI and ethics kind of questions that we can draw upon as well as communicators?
The quick answer to the second part of the question is yes. Just as we in public relations are feeling that some of the routine and entry-level tasks of the practice can be overtaken by the use of AI, the same is applying in other professional areas as well. You think of the solicitor's office having to do basic legal research where documents can be summarized quite quickly, sought out and summarized quite quickly with the summaries checked over for accuracy and so on. That kind of basic work can be done. So that can be helped through the use of AI. So other professions are facing exactly the same problems, and it's worth dipping into them to look at how they're addressing these questions, whether they're further ahead or behind where we are in public relations practice. The question, and thank you for the question, it really does open tremendous areas for discussion. We've got the larger problem of the general corruption of public debate, has been
John, I'm not sure I've lost you at this end. Shayoni, are you hearing?
I think we've lost John, I think and I'm not going to try and walk in John's shoes. So.
Bear with this, audience, while we try and get John back. Actually, I've got another question for you, Shayoni. I was thinking about, from a practitioner point of view, what are we doing as communicators to help clients? Because obviously, as you start to talk about introducing AI into strategic comms and strategy for your clients and work for your clients, what's their reaction? What sort of work do you have to do with clients?
Yeah, I think that's only right that we address this. So I think so. Our clients are our colleagues, and when I talk about practice, I do include them within that. I think, like us, perhaps agency side clients are facing similar challenges.
Yeah.
And I think any good relationship between a partner and their client should be having these discussions and trying to understand where capabilities lie, being quite honest about our own capabilities or capability gaps. I think the worst thing we can do as certainly agency side is pretend we know about something that we do not. And PR Week did a story on this, if people have read it a few weeks ago, and I think they spoke to five of us, all independently. So we kind of didn't know what everyone else was saying, but we all came to the same conclusion. So there was consensus that it is a lot of smoke and mirrors. So not to say there isn't expertise, there is expertise, but that expertise is not distributed as we would like it to appear, right? So build that trust with your client, help them understand how you're using AI, what your current gaps are, have that conversation about that. There could be co-creation with your client to try and understand how you might help each other in building your capability gaps. Be very honest about how you're using AI. I use AI all the time and I'm absolutely open about it. But it's also very important to understand the risks from AI, right? So when I look at, everyone's talking about AI adoption and skills advancement, all of that. So for me, from a behavioral science lens, is understanding how can we use behavioral science to understand the hidden risks of AI adoption. I think that's often not being discussed at the scale that it should. When we're looking at the risk assessment of AI embedded integration, we're looking at a very macro picture, not necessarily looking at the humans who are powering some of this integration. But there's also, how do we use behavioral science to build confidence and capability within the workforce to use AI in the ways that it was meant to be used. So I think there's a lot to discuss. It's a technology that is fundamentally reshaping our reality, right? I mean, very soon we might not even believe a conversation like this. This might all be synthetic. So it is reshaping our life in ways that we've never experienced. And I think, A, we need to keep up. B, we need to be honest about what we know about it and where we don't know about it. And we've got to really ensure that we work in a way that builds integrity and trust, because that currency, we're losing that very, very quickly.
Thanks, Shayoni, and welcome back, John. Did you want to go back to readdressing the original question, John? Or have we lost you again?
He's gone.
I think he's gone on us.
Oh,
no
worries.
We haven't had any more questions through, but just a little bit more, Shayoni. We've had some great questions with some really big, meaty sort of responses. Is there a question you would have liked to have been asked? What do you think we could have addressed?
That's such an interview question, Kerry. Is there a question? No, I don't have a question that I would have liked to be asked. I would like to ask our audience, like, how are you using AI? I mean, if anyone would like to be so bold and volunteer your personal experience. It's one thing to hear from, like people probably hear me and John a lot, but there has to be peer-to-peer, right? And for us to be able to build our own capabilities and, fess up to our gaps, we need to make that the norm. The fact is that the majority of practice is not using AI efficiently or accurately. So it's not wrong if you don't know something, just have that conversation. But yeah, would love to hear from the room, and maybe we have experts in the room, which I'd love to also hear from. If you're using it efficiently in very innovative ways, please share that with us.
Yes, for audience, please feel free. You can drop anything, comments through on the Q&A. It'd be great to hear from you on that, as Shayoni said, particularly as I think we've lost John now for good.
We've lost John.
We've lost
50% of the panel.
Well, on that basis, let's see. I'll give it a moment to see if anybody else is wanting to either add some commentary or ask any additional questions. Yes, I think we've definitely lost John for good.
Be brave, raise a hand, volunteer your views and experiences.
Yeah, I'll give it a moment. Nothing's coming through on the chat or the Q&A. Okay, but you're open to conversations going forward, Shayoni, if anybody wanted to reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. By all means, connect with me. I am, let me see if I pop my email so you guys have me.
And I'll add your contact details. I'll be sending out to all the people attending and the people who registered as well. I'm going to work on the basis that I think John is struggling with issues and that we're not going to be able to get him back. So I think on that basis and the fact that we haven't had any more questions submitted, I'm going to close the session. But I'd like to thank you, Shayoni, and John as well in his absence for the thought-provoking contributions, and also to the audience for submitting 2 meaty questions, really. I'm just going to show how AI impacts all of us. So just a quick reminder for those who've attended, thank you very much. It has been recorded. As soon as it's edited, it will go on to PRCA TV on YouTube. I'll send a link to that channel so you can subscribe and get that when that comes through. I'll also be sharing John's notes with the references and resources that he mentioned. And if you'd like to find more information about PRCA, please do feel free to get in contact with me. You should see my email when you registered, and also from communications today with the webinar link. You can follow us on PRCA in the Southwest region on a LinkedIn page, and for PRCA Cymru, we're on X, and our handle is @PRCA_Cymru. So please do get in touch. And I think what we've realized today, that AI in PR and in any industry is a journey. It's not a destination. And conversations like this will help with our knowledge, highlight the questions, and hopefully give us some more confidence. And just on that note, John's reappeared. John, I've just wrapped up the session. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I'm really sorry about my technical problems, but I hope what I've been able to contribute this afternoon has been useful. And if we are saying goodbye to the participants, thank you very much for taking part in the event with us.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, everyone. As I said, I will be in touch. It might not be today, but I'll be following up with the resources, contact details, and letting you know how to sign up to our PRCA TV. So on behalf of PRCA Cymru and PRCA generally, I'd like to thank Shayoni and John, and thank you guys for taking the time to attend our webinar this afternoon. Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.